Hello, everybody. How's it going? Happy Wednesday. Is it Wednesday? I feel like I lose track of every day. It is Wednesday. All right. Welcome. This is Michelle Benjamin from AUDIENCEX. We are here to talk about how the iOS 14 Apple update is going to impact Facebook advertisers. Welcome. I'm going to give everybody just a second to join. Before we get started, I'll just go over some housekeeping items, which I will repeat again. But yes, we are recording this and we will be sending it out to everyone afterwards. So don't worry about that. If you have any questions, feel free to send them over in the chat box or the Q&A. If we don't address them during the actual presentation, we are happy to follow up with you to clarify any questions, because I know this is a new and tricky topic. So our presenter today is Chris Clark. He's our Director of Search and Social. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Michelle.
There he is. How are you?
Doing fine, thanks.
And yeah, Chris runs our search and social programs for clients across every industry. He's got a lot of experience. Facebook and Instagram are obviously a huge part of a lot of people's media plans. So he's our expert. And if you have any questions, pass them on. Otherwise, Chris, I will pass it over to you.
All right, thanks, Michelle. To start, we're going to go over a few different things here, as you can see in our agenda. We're going to walk through a background of what the iOS 14 changes are and what they mean. We're going to tackle some questions that advertisers may be asking or need to ask. And finally, we're going to go through some actions to take so everyone can be on top of what they need to do in response to this changing framework. So to start with the background, let's ask the question, what's happening with iOS 14? We've got a few things to think about. There are a lot of acronyms that are thrown around. I'm going to try not to inundate you guys, make this too in the weeds. The Apple change is known as ATT. This is the App Tracking Transparency Framework. It's a new privacy protection framework for Apple devices the company announced. And under ATT, when an Apple device owner downloads and then opens a new app, or opens an existing app once the framework is put in place, they're going to get a notification. It will pop up asking if they want to be tracked across third-party apps and websites. If you can see on the right-hand side of the slide in the middle phone image, there's the actual version of the app that people are going to see, and they're going to be able to opt out of the IDFA. So the IDFA is Apple's advertising identifier, and it's not new. It exists already, but you had to take action to opt out. You're automatically opt in. Now you're going to get this prompt, and it's going to be really, really easy to opt out. AEM is going to be covered a little bit later, but the AEM is Facebook's response to that, called aggregated event management. So going back to this prompt is going to allow users to choose whether they really want to allow their data to be tracked by third-party sites and apps. And the key, again, is that it switches from opt-out to opt-in. And the expectation is that roughly 75% of users are going to opt out. And so that's a huge potential impact. So if we think about the math there, roughly half of mobile users are on iPhones. Roughly 3/4 are expected to opt out. That's going to translate into about a 3/8 decline in tracked users. That's a huge decline in users. And an additional part of the problem is that Apple users generate more revenue. So I was shocked by this. I was reading the Economist the other week, and they had an article. I didn't see the source they cited, but it said that Apple users generate, in some cases, 5 times the revenue of Android. That's huge. So you're not only losing a huge share of potential users, you're losing what are often the most valuable users that you'd like to advertise to. So this is all going to have the effect of restricting, aggregating, and delaying event reporting. And that's going to have effects throughout the platform. Not only Facebook, but other platforms as well. Who is going to be affected by these changes? Who will be most affected? It's a list of people. In my opinion, I think high on the list is any advertiser who's running like a low margin D2C business. So many of you may be familiar with a lot of DIY D2C entrepreneurs. You know, if you've got a buddy who buys stuff on Alibaba and resells it on Shopify, probably running with a low ROAS in the 2s, maybe 3, something like that. Once you lose the ability to measure some of these conversions and to retarget effectively and things like that, your ROAS is going to decline, and it may go, below break even. So it gets a lot harder to advertise with confidence. And if you have a low margin, you want to make sure that your advertising is profitable. So those advertisers are going to have a tough time. Number 2, advertisers who are using cross-domain tracking. So an example of this would be anyone, if they're running with a separate domain for their shopping cart, their lead form, an application form. I've run across many advertisers who have done this. They have a third-party functionality built because it saves money or whatever the reason is. And sometimes you can place a pixel there, sometimes you can't. But in the cases where you might have been tracking those conversions on another site, you're going to lose that cross-domain tracking. So that functionality just won't work anymore. That's a big deal for some people. You're going to have to, rebuild your website or add that functionality to it, something like that. So that could be a big impact. Another cohort of users, or advertisers, are going to be affected by the attribution changes. So if you've got a longer sales cycle and you see a lot of conversions that happen 2, 3, 4 weeks out, you're going to see an impact in your reporting because of the reduction in the attribution windows. And then the next group is going to be advertisers who rely on social to acquire new app users. So speaking mostly for the content here, we're really going to cover primarily the impacts on website-based advertisers. We're not really going to get too deeply into the impacts and the specifics with apps. They're roughly analogous. There's going to be limitations on the event tracking. The strategies for resolving those issues, not resolving, can't resolve all of it, but for dealing with those issues are pretty similar. It relies on updating your SDK and making some changes there. But we're primarily going to cover in this webinar the impact on web-based advertising. So that's what's happening. What are some questions for actual advertisers to ask themselves about how does it affect me? Okay, marketers are going to experience the following across platforms. So this is not limited to Facebook. This is going to be the impact seen in LinkedIn, parts of Google, not search so much, but let's say an app campaign, Snapchat, et cetera, et cetera. Number 1, performance is expected to decline. What is really unknown is how much. So we know that a lot of users are going to opt out, but every advertiser has a different customer base, and they might have customers who opt in. They might have customers who prefer Android, who aren't impacted. So it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen for everyone individually. And so that's why we see such ranges of numbers, like, to expect 75% user opt out, that's an average. the ranges I've seen have gone from that being as low as 2%, which would be catastrophic, to 40, 45%, which is not such a big deal. So everyone's kind of going to have to roll with it and see what happens. Audiences are going to shrink. So targeting and other interest-based audiences and things will be a little bit smaller. Activity might start to be optimized away from the audience networks based on how this impacts their effectiveness. App campaigns are going to have a big decrease in reach. And I'd say the biggest implications are really for Facebook for a couple of reasons. Number one being that they're a leading app install platform. So they're going to have a huge hit to their app install business. And Facebook is a hub for a lot of small businesses. So all kinds of local advertisers and things have quite a presence there. And as we said, small DIY firms, DIY businesses, and they're going to be affected as well. All right, specific to Facebook, we've got a few different things happening. Number one is that conversions are going to be delayed by up to 3 days. So we're going to need a larger buffer here to assess performance. We can't look at yesterday's data and expect it to have all the results. So, for agencies out there who are, talking to clients at a pretty regular clip, you're going to have to put some distance between your analysis of conversion activity and the actual days when those conversions occurred. Number two, custom audiences are going to be smaller. These are the audiences, to define custom audiences. This is how Facebook defines their audiences that they would use for things like retargeting or excluding past converters. So all of these pixel-based audiences and things are going to be smaller because they're not going to have the same number of events tracked. This includes, tracking will be limited to 8 events. This includes custom conversions. So if you're an advertiser who likes to track a lot of page views or button clicks as custom conversions, even if they're based on a standard event like page view, they're still going to be considered unique events for this 8 event limit. So any advertiser who is running with 20, 30, 100 button clicks as events that they want to track, that's just not going to be feasible any longer. You're not going to get that level of reporting. I would note here, if any advertisers are using a huge number of button clicks, my personal opinion is that's sort of a substitute for an analytics platform, and it's not a great way to do it. So if that's your use case and you're going to be heavily impacted here, I think there's a better way to go about that anyway, whether it's Google Analytics or Mixpanel or whatever your tool of choice is going to be. But that's not going to be the way forward with tracking all these page events in Facebook, for example. The next impact is segmentation is no longer supported. So these breakdowns that we often look at to look at performance and analyze it, breakdowns that you can see on the right here for things like age, gender, platform, those are no longer going to be supported. That information will simply not exist. We're also going to have reduced attribution windows. So the number of conversions effectively reported will decline. Targeting and optimization are going to suffer. So Facebook's machine learning is fueled by data, and all of this change is going to decrease the amount of data available and really give us a loss of intent signals. It's all going to add up to weaker performance. So for years, advertisers could find success relying mostly on data. That's sort of the value prop of Facebook from an advertiser perspective. This trend has reversed. So what was advertising before all this data? It was really creative. So I don't think we're going to go back to Mad Men days, but creative is going to become relatively more important. Okay, what's next? When is the deadline? There was an interview with Tim Cook, I think it was last week, where he was asked about when this is going to come into effect, and he said, in the coming weeks. Apple had said previously that it was expected to, roll these things out in early spring and maybe even Q1. Here we are, it's Q2. So the way I'm looking at it is that the shoe's going to drop at any time now. So if you're not prepared, you might get pinched. So I would want to prepare. What happens if we miss this deadline? Is it the end of the world? No, it's not the end of the world. But what's going to happen is Facebook is going to choose your 8 events for you. So if you don't think that you've got your best events chosen and configured for your tracking, Facebook's going to make that determination on your behalf. Hopefully they're right, but if they're not, it'll cause you to see reporting that you might not be optimal. So you probably want to get that straightened out in advance so that you're in control of it. The other situation, and I don't know why they did it this way, but if you have an ad set in your campaign that is using an event that's not in the list of the 8 that you select, it'll be permanently paused. You won't be able to restart it. You have to rebuild that campaign. So that's also not the end of the world, but it's definitely annoying if you have to go in and like recreate campaigns. So, save yourself the headache and get this straightened out in advance. So I'll add here also that if you need more help after this webinar, you're welcome to reach out to us, but there's also a lot of information in the resource tab here directly in your ads manager. So you can see in the images on the right and on the slide, in the ads manager, next to your campaign ad set and ads tabs, there's a new tab called Resource Center. And if you look at it, it gives you specific tasks that you need to take to be prepared. So they do a reasonable job of giving you guidance here so that you don't have to learn this in exquisite detail, but you can get yourself prepared by understanding these steps, following the steps, and then understanding the updates. So let's talk about these specific action items. The first thing that you're going to need to do is to verify your domain. So this is really specific to Facebook. This is not something that needs to be done on all of the other platforms. So it's a result of the AEM that I had mentioned in the previous, not previous, but earlier slide, the Aggregated Event Management Framework. So for Facebook, this is a step that they are going to want you to follow. And you need a few things to do it. So the first thing you're going to need is a person who has the admin access to their website's DNS records. This, in my experience, is typically not the media folks. It's somebody, in like the web dev team, or elsewhere. But you're going to need to connect with one of the people who has the DNS record so they can make an update. Second, you need to get up the person who has the admin access to the Facebook pixel so they can change all the settings within the business manager. And then you're going to need your list of prioritized events. So what that means is in choosing your 8 events that you're going to want to be able to still report on, you want to have them in priority from highest to lowest so that in the instance of multiple events occurring, you can help ensure that the event which is most important is the one that gets reported. So as far as the domain, most advertisers just have one domain. I know there are some who have multiple, but most just have one, like AUDIENCEX.com. And this is called the ETLD+1, or the effective top level domain +1. You don't have to worry about the definition so much. What's more important is to understand that this covers all subdomains. So for example, performance.audiencx.com would be a subdomain of audiencx.com. It would fall in below that. And so if you had multiple subdomains, you would not need to verify each subdomain. You would just verify the top level domain and you're covered. So how do we do it? From within the business manager, as you can see on the right-hand side here, we have within the business settings, a list of menu items on the left. All we need to do is go into brand safety, click on domains, click the blue add button to add your domain, you type it in, and then you follow the instructions that it provides. There are a few different ways to do it based on whatever works best for you. It's not super complicated. It does take a few days for the changes to propagate potentially. So it's not something that can, necessarily be done in minutes, just because it takes time to take effect. But it's not many steps. It's not very difficult. So this is an easy one to get moving on. All right, next you're gonna need to prioritize your events. So you're gonna have to choose the ones that you want. And after you've chosen them, you're gonna need to prioritize them in descending order of value. So for example, if you were an e-commerce customer, you would start probably with purchase, maybe followed by add to cart, followed by view content in a simple example. It's very important to remember here, we've had a lot of questions about this and we have a lot of advertisers using custom conversions. Custom conversions count against this limit. So custom conversions, for those of you who are familiar with them, can be based on standard events. And you can make many custom conversions based on standard events. It's not the standard event that counts, which would allow you to have many custom conversions based on it. The custom conversion itself counts. So you're more limited than you might expect. If you have more than 8 events that you track, again, the example that strikes me is an advertiser tracking a lot of different page views or button clicks. You're going to have to make choices. You're only going to get to track 8. So you have to figure out what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of. It's important to note that these changes, or rather assignments, can be changed in the future. So you're not locked into this for life. It's not permanent, but there is a cost of changing, which is that once the ATT enforcement begins, there's a delay in the change. So I wouldn't want you to think that you can just change these whenever you want with no impact. You want to get your plan together and have this all established and implemented, and then only change it when you need to. So try to set yourself up with a plan that is consistent and sustainable so you don't have to tinker with this all the time. So once your domain is verified, you can configure your events. And this is what you're going to see in Facebook when you're doing it. So from the Events Manager tab in Facebook, if you scroll down to the right-hand side, on the right-hand side, you'll come to this blue and purple tab that says Aggregated Event Measurement. Sorry, I think I said management before. It's Aggregated Event Measurement. And this is where you can click on the Configure Web Events button. That will take you to the next screen, which is where you will actually choose your event source and then the specific event. So in this case, you can see that the first event chosen as the highest priority is based on a pixel. And then we've got the specific event, in this case called a lead. And we're able to add more events up to 8 with that green button on the right. the next thing to think about doing is benchmarking your performance. And this is not essential. This is really a recommendation on Facebook's part. On January 19th, Facebook reduced the default attribution window for advertisers from 28-day click to 7-day click to align with ATT. So if you saw a sudden performance decline around that time, this is probably the cause. It's not that fewer events are happening, they're just not being reported. So for those of you familiar with attribution models, like we can see here in this table on the right, we've got attribution occurring within the predetermined windows of 1, 7, or 28 days. So specifically, if we're looking at the clicks data here, the click attribution data in the lower right box, we see adds to cart from 1 day, 7 days, and 28 days. So if you were this advertiser and you had seen 66 adds to cart with 28-day attribution, now you're going to see 56 because you're only looking at adds to cart which occurred within 7 days. So it doesn't really mean that those 10 didn't happen, but you're not going to see that in your reporting, and it's going to make all of your reporting look a little less effective. So the reason Facebook is telling you to benchmark your performance is they know that it's going to make their entire channel look worse. And if it looks worse, they're going to get less budget allocated there. So they're really upset with Apple because this is going to have an immediate, material impact unless they go out of their way, which they're trying to do, to, educate advertisers on understanding exactly what this all means and how to navigate it. So these 1, 7, and 28-day attribution windows are still available in the platform. You can find them by going to your column customization setting. And if you scroll to the bottom right, you'll see the checkboxes where you can get these attribution windows to appear in your grid. And so when you do that, you're able to simply download it as a CSV and have it for future reference. But the key thing to know is that this is not going to be available in the UI forever. So this is something that's sort of going to expire. Now, there will be ways that you can access it through a reporting API, but I mean, if you're not already doing that now, that might not be worth your effort, which will vary by advertiser. So, just go in and get it now, just download it now so you can have it for reference. As all these other changes come about, it may not be as valuable in the distant future, but at least gives you a point of reference. So you can think about what the changes here will mean for your reporting. So once ATT is enforced, the reported performance is going to decline, but you're going to be able to roughly extrapolate, for example, that what was 60 conversions before attribution changes came into play will now be measured as, let's say, 45 or something like that. And so you can say, all right, well, I'm getting reporting on this. It says we've got 45 conversions, but actually that means 60. So maybe if I do a little math here, I can see that my CPA is not as high as I thought, and it's still within my acceptable range. So I'm okay to advertise at this level. So that's sort of the way you can think about what to do with this data. So after ATT enforcement begins and all these changes come into place, audiences shrink and things like that, what are you going to do? The number one thing we've been thinking about is really taking advantage, specifically in Facebook, of the other methods to help support our first party audiences. So that would include the in-app lead forms, video views, social engagement. This in-app data doesn't rely on pixel data. It's all captured in the platform. So, that is not only going to be a way to have some additional targeting features when these other audiences kind of shrink, but that's also going to be important in the future for cookie deprecation. And so between iOS 14 and the loss of cookies, 2022 is going to be different, and it's going to require different strategies. We're going to have to all figure out what to do in this new normal. At least we get a chance to deal with iOS 14 first and see how that goes before we have to tackle all the changes with cookies. But overall, we're going to have less data available. And as a result, creative development is going to become relatively more important. So to wrap that up, tied together, since we don't have a confirmed deadline, hard deadline for when these changes are going to begin affecting the platform and affect reporting and performance and everything, advertisers should take action now. So today's Wednesday. I would say get started on this before the weekend. It's not too challenging to get the domain verification going. And from there, you probably already have a sense of what your events are that you want to configure. And from that point, you'll be in a much better place. Now, you're going to have to figure out, once this starts to be enforced, what to do based on how your performance changes, but that's kind of the next step. So the first thing to think about is getting prepared for the immediate consequences, and that means getting domains verified, getting events set up, and being ready for it.
All right, thanks, Chris. That was excellent advice. I think there's a lot of tasks in there that we can all take back to our office. Someone had asked if we can share the deck, and yes, we can. If you are looking for these steps, we can share that with you. Just reach out to me. We're going to be sending out an email to everyone who registered with the recording. So if you'd like a copy of the deck, just reply back to that email. Our contact information is here. Just hello@AUDIENCEX if you have other questions. We did get a couple come in, and we will be sure to reach out to you individually to answer them. We are 3 minutes over time, which is why we are going to wrap this up now. But if you have any other questions, feel free to reply to that recording email or reach out to us at hello@AUDIENCEX. And we appreciate everyone joining us. Chris, I really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Happy to do it, Michelle.
All right, everyone have a lovely rest of your day, and we will be in touch soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.